Hey everyone, welcome to the One Code Camp channel. So in this video, we're going to continue our useState hook exploration, but now with not so simple examples. But with this, you'll be able to get an idea on how to utilize useState on more complex objects. So without further ado, let's get started.
So, in our last video, we covered the basics of useState hook with some straightforward examples. If you've missed it, be sure to check it out. I've linked it in the description box below. Okay, so we learned how to set up a basic useState example with a counter and manage multiple variables with a counter and a name. Now it's time to take things to the next level. So, in this video, we will explore some advanced concepts that will help you handle more complex state scenarios in your React applications. So, for your next example, let's have an initial state and function updaters. So, let's put it here in our app.js. Let's have an h3. Let's say this is an initial state and function updaters example. Okay. Oops. There you go. So let's create again another file inside our useState folder named function updaters.js. Okay, so the initial state, it doesn't have to be a simple value. So it can be a function as well, which is useful for, let's say, expensive computations. Okay, so we created a new file inside our useState folder named function updaters. And then here, let's start again by importing the React and then the useState hook from the React library. Okay. And then after that, let's define our function. So function updaters, and let's have here the return statement, and then export default so that we won't forget to export this later on. Function updaters. Okay, so here inside our function updaters, let's declare the const initial count is equal to, so this would be a function. And then inside this function, let's console.log calculating initial count, and then return 0. Okay, and then let's also declare here const count, and then the set count is equals to useState 0. Okay, and again here inside our return statement, let's have a div, and then let's again have a paragraph. You clicked count times, and then again let's have a button, and then on click set count plus 1, and then let's display click me. Oops. Okay, so in this example, the initial count, this is a function that runs when the component mounts. So this is useful for more complex initial state. So in our previous examples on useState, we saw how to update state with a simple function like count plus 1, right? So in this example, we will explore using function updaters with the useState, and these functions allow for more complex logic using or when updating a state. So in that, we will change this 0 to initial count. Okay. So let's break this code down. So similar to before, we imported again the React and then the useState from the React library. And then we defined a functional component named function updaters. And then we have here the initial count function. So we define a function named initial count that uses an arrow function syntax. Okay, so this function logs a message to the console. So the console, this is a useful tool for debugging complex calculations. And then it also returns the initial value for the count state, which is 0. Okay, and then this line right here, the const count, the set count is equal to useState initial count. So we use the useState with the initial count function as the initial value. So this ensures that the initial count calculation only happens once. Okay, and then after that is we have the JSX return. So this defines the user interface elements displayed by the component, similar to our previous example. So we have here a paragraph that displays you clicked count times, so it uses the string interpolation, and then we also have here the button using the onClick attribute. Okay, so let's import this again to our main application file, which is the app.js. So let's import function updaters, and then let's call that here after the h3. Okay, there you go. We now have here our function updaters. So what happened here is that the code demonstrates a function updater with the useState, right? So whenever you click this button, it also updates this count state right here. So this initial count function, this is called only once during the initial render to determine the starting value for count. So the key difference is using the function itself as the initial value for useState. So this ensures that the function runs only once during the initial render. So when the button is clicked, the update function passed to the onClick is used. So this function typically receives the current state value count and then returns the updated value, which is the count plus 1. Okay, so the React, it guarantees that the update function always receives the latest state value, even if multiple clicks happen in quick succession. Okay, so why is it important to use functions updaters sometimes? So function updaters, they are particularly helpful when you need to access the previous state value to calculate the next state. So this just prevents potential issues with outdated state values during updates, especially if the component re-renders multiple times quickly. Okay, so it prevents stale state issues. So by using the current state value in the update function, we avoid issues where outdated state values might be used for calculations. Okay, and then also the function updaters, it allows for more complex logic within the update process, especially when dealing with asynchronous operations or dependent state updates. Okay, so that is it for our initial state and function updaters example. Okay, so next, let's have another example. Let's say, since in our previous lessons we learned how to update state using the useState function and function updaters, what if, let's say, sometimes you need to update state based on the previous state? Okay, so let's do that here in our next example. Let's have here updating state based on previous state example. Okay, there you go. Oops, it's a typo. Okay, so yep, let's explore how to access the previous state value within the update function itself. So this can be useful in certain scenarios. So let's start first by creating a new file inside our useState folder, and then let's name this previousstate.js. Okay, and then here let's use the emmet shortcut RAFCE to create the boilerplate code for our, or the template for our React JS previous state component. So here let's add the useState, since we will also be using the useState, and then let's remove this previous state message right here. Okay, what we want to do is let's declare the const count, again count set count equal to useState, and then the initial value, which is the 0. And then here again in our return statement, let's have the p you clicked count times, and then let's have the button. So we will be using the onClick function, and then set count, and then let's have here prev count, and then prev count plus 1. Okay, and then let's display here click me. Okay, so again, similar to before, we import the React and useState hook from the React library, and then we now have here the previous state component. So this defines a functional component named prevState. And then we also have here the state and then the update function, which are the count and then the set count. So we use the useState to create a state variable count with an initial value of 0. And then after that, we have here the JSX return, so the user interface elements. These are again similar to the previous examples, displaying the paragraph and then the button. So the key difference here is that the onClick handler for the button. Okay, so we are using the prev count and then an arrow function, prev count plus 1. So this ensures that we always have the most recent state, which is also crucial in asynchronous scenarios. Okay, so basically this line right here, or this code snippet right here, the prev count, this is a parameter representing the previous state value, and then this arrow function, it allows us to access this parameter and use it within the update logic. So in this case, we just simply increment the prev count by 1 to get the new value. Okay, so let's import this again in our main application, which is the app.js, to view it in our browser. So let's import previous state, and then let's call that here previous state. Okay, so in here, as you can see, whenever you click the button, again, this count right here also is updating, right? So what happened here is that the critical part here is the arrow function passed to the onClick. So the onClick handler for the button, it uses an arrow function with a special argument named the prev count. So this prev count argument, it just represents the previous state value of count before the update. So we can use this prev count to ensure the update logic relies on the most recent state value. Okay, so basically this function updates the count state but it uses a special syntax to access the previous state. Okay. So you should see there a click counter and a button similar to the previous examples, and then clicking the button increases the count as expected. Okay, so that is for the updating state based on the previous state. So why are we going to use the previous state? While this example might seem like a simple increment, accessing the previous state can also be useful in some scenarios, like for example, you're doing some conditional updates based on the previous state value, or you're calculating deltas or differences between previous and current state, or you're accumulating values based on previous state. So that is where accessing a previous state is important in ReactJS. Okay? And then let's have our last example, which is handling complex objects or managing complex state objects. So let's put that here in our update.js. So let's say complex state objects example. Okay. So managing complex state objects like objects or arrays, it requires careful updates to ensure immutability. Okay, so we'll explore how to handle complex state objects that contain multiple properties. Okay, so let's do that by creating again a new file inside our useState folder, and let's name it complex objects.js. Okay, so we'll look into managing complex objects as state using the useState. So this will allow us to store and update multiple pieces of data within a single state variable. Okay, so let's use here again the RAFCE shortcut to have our template for the React, and then let's add the useState here in the import statement since we will be using the useState. Okay, so let's create the code. Okay, so let's declare here a constant variable user, and set user is equal to the useState, and then let's have here the name. Let's assign an empty string to the name, and then the age, this would be 0. Okay, and then after that, let's have here the update name. Have here an event and an arrow function. Let's have the set user. And then let's have here for the increment age. Let's again use an arrow function. Set user, and then the previewer. Age. Previewer that age plus 1. Okay, and then here inside our return statement, let's delete this complex objects, and then inside this div, let's have an input field, and then let's have here the type text attribute, and then the value user.name, and then on change, update name, and then the placeholder would be enter your name. Okay, and then let's also have here a paragraph. Let's say the user dot name is user dot age years old, and then let's have here the button. So button on click, and then let's call the increment age, and then let's display increment age. Okay, and then let's click save. Okay, so in here the user is an object with the name and then the age, and then we also use the spread operator to update only the parts of the state that change, preserving immutability. Okay, so similar to the previous codes, we again imported the React and useState hook from the React library, and then this just defines the functional component named complex objects, and then we have here a state with the object. So we use the useState we use the useState with an object literal as the initial state. So this object has properties name, which has an empty string value, and age that has an 0 initial value. And then we have here update functions. So the update name and increment age, these are functions that handle the state updates. Okay, so both of them uses the set user function, but in different ways. Okay, and then after that we have the return statement. So we first have an input field for entering the name bound to the user.name state, and then we also have a paragraph displaying the name and then the age from the state object, and then lastly we have a button to increment the age. Okay, so again, let's import this in our main application file, which is the app.js, to see this in action. So import complex objects, and then let's call that here complex objects, then click save. So as you can see, we now have here enter your name, and then an empty string, and then 0 years old. Okay, so let's have here Alice is 0 years old. So if we want to increment the age, we will just click this button right here that says increment age. So Alice is, say, 15 years old. Okay, so what happened here is that this code, it demonstrates managing complex state object with multiple properties. So the initial state is an object with properties name and age. So we also define separate functions. So we have here the const update name function, and then the increment age function. So this is to update specific properties within the state object. And then the key concept here is using the spread operator, which is this one, with the updater function provided by the useState. Okay, so this allows to create a new object based on the previous state, which is the previewer, and then we also modify the specific property that we want to update, like for example, the name in the update name, and then the age in the increment age. Okay, so you should see there an input field, a paragraph, and a button. So typing your name here in the input field updates the display name, and then clicking this increment age button increases the age displayed in the paragraph. Okay, so for example, you have here Jane. So you'll see here Jane is 25 years old. Okay, so managing complex objects with useState allows us to store and update related data within a single state variable. So this promotes better organization and it also simplifies state updates for user information or other complex data structures. Okay, so yep, that would be all for our useState hook. So that's it for today's deep dive into useState. So we covered the basics, the multiple state variables, the complex state objects, and then we also covered how to declare state, update it, and then enhance our component with additional functionality. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful. So if you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified about our future video. So see you again in our next ReactJS hook video tutorial. Thanks for watching and happy coding.